Melee influence does not need to be nerfed. Why would I say that? Why is it even in question? Because melee influence is easily the most used and most recommended arcane of all the melee arcanes. It's just 1 out of 11 options, and yet it is so much more useful in the majority of missions on the majority of weapons. It is amazing. So let's talk what makes it so amazing and why the others are the real issue. I'm TheKengineer, let's solve a practical problem. I started with this topic weeks ago as an interesting idea to cover, but after exploring the depth of the balance of these arcanes and Warframe in general, it has accidentally turned into a dissertation. Let's cover some very quick background. Melee arcanes were introduced at the end of 2023 with the Whispers in the Walls update. This gave us most of the melee arcanes we see today, along with the Tennokai mods and Mechanic 2. You cannot even access melee arcanes without completion of the Whispers in the Walls quest. These are one of the latest upgrades you'll acquire for any part of your arsenal. Primary and secondary arcane adapters can be purchased as early as access to Duviri, not even needing a new war. Melee arcanes need that and more. After unlocking the arcane slot on a melee, you also have the arcane farm itself. Acquire up to 21 of the same arcane from missions that again only open up after Whispers in the Walls or even later. With this level of gating and progression, you would anticipate a similar level of returns. In the 2.5 years since their release, melee influence has retained a dominating position as the most broadly powerful of the melee arcanes. Frankly, it's not even close. What makes melee influence so good anyway? Its trigger is simply that you land an electric proc with melee, with a 20% activation chance. Its effect is that for 18 seconds, all subsequent elemental procs you land with melee will spread to all other enemies within 20 meters. No line of sight check, no reduction from follow through, no chance of fading to spread. Full proc spreading to all enemies within range of the target. That triggering condition is very easy to achieve. You don't need to kill an enemy, nor do you need to hit them in a specific way, such as only light attacks or finishes. You only need to land an electric proc. Electricity is easy. The vast majority of melee weapons can be modded for electricity without issue. Electricity can be modded alongside both viral and magnetic, the latter thanks to the later added magnetic mods. Electricity is a damage bonus against Anarchs, Corpus Amalgams, and the Murmur, with no faction resistant to it. Melees have access to the mod Weeping Wounds, an enormous plus 440% status chance bonus. With that in play, the majority of melees are capable of regular status procs. With electricity modded in, just from a 90% mod, shocking touch, nearly half of all those status effects will be electric. All said and done, it's easy to build into electricity, easy to apply it, and it largely lacks downsides for bringing it. Once this easy trigger has been landed, the next 18 seconds are buffed for your melee. It'll spread elemental status procs to all targets in range. Wouldn't you know it, electric procs are elemental. The same effect that triggers the arcane is an effect which benefits from the arcane. On a weapon with Shocking Touch and Voltaic Strike, 60% of your damage is electric. In terms of status damage, 50% of the damage dealt, when electric procs, is delivered each second as electric status damage. With as little as 100% status chance then, electric procs would typically deliver damage per second equal to 30% of your direct DPS. You can apply that 30% to every enemy within 20 meters constantly. This is melee influence. If you weren't already convinced that melee influence is effective, surely by now you are. It's not perfect though. Melee influence fails to be helpful in a small handful of scenarios. Those are enemies which are status immune, enemies fought alone with nothing nearby, enemies which die in one hit. Those status immune enemies are rare. Status resistant ones are a little more common, most notably acolytes on Steel Path, but largely enemies do not have immunity to electric status effects. While other status types are limited or outright ignored, including Cold against Xmas and the Fragmented boss, or Radiation against most VIP enemies, electric just gets to keep on damaging them. Enemies fought alone are a significant debuff to melee influence. With no one to spread to, the procs are useless. This has a serious limiting effect on some boss fights, though a number of boss fights have enemy swarms on the approach or as part of their takedown objectives. Very low density missions, disruption missions, assassination missions, peril to boss fights, these sorts of encounters aren't great for melee influence. The third category, enemies dying in one hit, is a quirk of melee influence. It can only spread status effects you apply if the target didn't die in the process. This means in low level missions, you cannot rely on melee influence without bringing down the power of some melees. Hitting too hard means you stall your output. Now, as much as these are weaknesses of melee influence, it's not alone. Status immune enemies shut down Afflictions, Careen and Vortex while also weakening exposure. Solo enemies shut down Fortification and Vortex. If there are no basic enemies, Crescendo also takes a hit. Solo enemies tend to also be status immune, so you can combine those two sets of issues. Enemies being one-shot without an Arcane's help renders all of Afflictions, Animosity, Careen, Crescendo, Doughty, Duplicate Exposure and Retaliation pointless. However, other Arcanes being limited doesn't talk to whether or not influence should be nerfed. We can better look at what influence achieves. I ran dozens of missions in various locations, comparing influence builds to other melee and non-melee setups. High meta stuff, not the stug. Melee influence increased kill speed almost every time compared to other melee options, ranging from around 20% to 60% faster. However, melee influence setups competed with, rather than outshone, gun builds. Melee kept up with guns. I can hardly call for a nerf for an Arcane that doesn't thoroughly outclass other ways of playing the game. No, what stands out is that if melee influence was only being competitive with the best ranged weapons, when equipped to some of the best melee weapons, what are the other Arcanes even doing? Let's come at this from a broad value approach, considering both triggers and results. Melee Afflictions will apply 6 additional status effects of each type currently on enemies which get lifted, knocked down or ragdolled by your melee. This effect can be achieved on many weapons, but certainly feels made for harmony at release alongside. Compared to melee influence, Afflictions requires you to do a lot more work to get the effect. It is resisted by any units with overguard, or otherwise preventive of being jostled around. Even freezing the enemy with cold procs mostly disables Afflictions, and the result is a lot more damage to the individual targets you set up than knocked around. It's a powerful arcane for those specific targets, and harmony really does work well with it. But if you boil down Warframe to 2 options, clearing hordes or clearing VIPs, it stalls hard. Applying lots of extra procs to single enemies with no spreading attached doesn't clear groups. Applying knockdown or similar effects to VIPs will usually achieve nothing as they're immune. Afflictions is trying to be in this middle ground of status application that's a little hard to find when, influence exists. Melee Animosity will grant you additional crit chance on heavy attacks by performing successful non-heavy attacks. The trigger somewhat lies, implying it stacks per hit when it actually stacks per successful attack. Multi-hitting attacks do not multi-trigger. Now, while the trigger of just getting hits is very generous, even more so than melee influence, the effect is small. Don't let the 420% maximum critical chance bonus fool you. Firstly, it's additive to mods like Blood Rush and Galvanized Steel, limiting the actual growth you get. Second, it's applying on heavy attacks, which often will already be killing enemies. With Tennokai being a thing, also triggered by doing non-heavy attacks before doing a heavy attack, high multiplier heavy attacks are plenty easy. Not only that, Tennokai triggers a lot sooner than Animosity will usually max stack. Often Tennokai will trigger before even at half stacks on Animosity. And again, it's only helping you kill single targets harder. Melee Doughty is a peculiar arcane, likely born out of acknowledging that puncture sucks, but not having a good way to fix it. Instead, it forces you into building for this poor damage type, a type which many melees just can't support, and then requires modding in high status chance too. Your reward is more critical damage, meaning you'll have spent mods on a low value damage type and low value status type, just to try and do more damage with that bad type. In very specific cases like Gara puncture builds, it has a use. For most everything else, it's just worse. Even when I tried using a puncture build against a faction weak to puncture, just switching to a normal setup with no arcane and sensible damage types did exactly as well. The arcane provided no value numerical nor in gameplay. There are some arcanes with more appreciable effect though. Melee Careen is a wonderful arcane, despite the fact that I don't really use it myself. Rolling will freeze enemies within around 5 meters of your path, and hitting frozen enemies with your melee will deal 2.5 times damage. Not only does this arcane create a unique reward for rolling, it's building off a trigger that every frame, every build can work with. Atop this, the effect it produces is the trigger for its secondary effect of extra damage, a tight little loop of value. Now, it's not the top damage dealing arcane at all. If one focuses on rolling first, killing second, you will end up out of position more often. This impacts kill rate, but the double value of enhanced damage and defensively freezing enemies is still clear. Melee exposure also has an easy trigger: cast an ability in Warframe. It's a very easy trigger and rewards a very simple bonus of plus 60% corrosive damage per cast, up to 240%. This enables corrosive to be used alongside viral, gas, toxin and electric where most weapons otherwise cannot, while granting 240% more elemental damage. My only gripe is that all stacks run out as one when the timer expires, rather than decaying stacks like with Primary Deadhead. Not a huge deal, but easy to overlook if you get a good melee flow, or spend a little too long moving from one location to another without casting anything. Melee exposure doesn't really outcompete melee influence in most situations. Where it does is mostly only when you really need to wail on a single target or a small number of heavy targets, especially status immune ones. Otherwise, in this often horde shooter game, influence just does more. But exposure is still a fallback arcane for its ease of triggering and applying. It's that balance of easy and value that other arcanes fail at. Melee Duplicate is a prime example of this. When triggered, you hit enemies twice instead of once. Brilliant! Double the hits, double the damage, double the status. It's multi-shot for melees. Condition: only yellow crits apply. When I look at ranged weapons, the basic multi-shot mods do not come with a stipulation of only yellow crits get multi-shot. Barrel Diffusion also comes with more than double, and that's a basic version. The galvanized variants all give 230% multi-shot, equivalent to hitting 3.3 times over, not merely 2 times. Melee Duplicate then constrains the output harshly. If you want to use it, it's ideal to keep your melee weapon at around 130 to 140% critical chance. This does mean a chance of orange crit, and thus a chance of no second hit, but the second hits you do land may also re-roll into orange crits. It's weird, but the math works out. That said, a lot of powerful melees can far exceed 130% modded critical chance, and that's not even considering the power behind Raffle Advance. And again, all Duplicate does is hit twice. Not hit further, not bypass any armor or status immunity, just twice, but only when you land the weakest crit. Melee Crescendo hits a similar issue. It provides initial combo, all the way up to maximum combo. Brilliant! Only to get there, you need to perform dozens of finisher kills. This is not a small task. Higher level enemies often won't die in one finisher attack unless you mod specifically for finishers. Then, once you've done your finishers, you now have some wasted mod slots for the rest of the mission. But say you can afford that, what is it good for? For light attacks, full initial combo means you don't need narrow mod. You also don't need combo duration like with primary and secondary dexterity. You can keep the valuable effects of Blood Rush and Weeping Wounds without having to attack enemies at all. But then, slotting an arcane asking for dozens of finisher kills, only to rarely attack enemies, doesn't sound all that smart to me. For chained heavy attacks, you can now have a 12 times combo on every attack. Do note that you'll want to mod in heavy attack efficiency still, else you'll be waiting a long while on the recharge of your initial combo. That's not just a visual effect, it does actually take 5.5 seconds to recharge. Or you can use Tennokai, the feature released in the same update as Crescendo. Rather than slow heavy attacks and a slow recharge, you get fast, free heavy attacks and can still use any other arcane as you please. Which leaves the remaining choice of using combo for not melee, basically for secondary outburst and for Ruvox Incarnate's movement speed perk. Crescendo is not convenient to stack and currently offers restricted value for a legendary arcane. Melee Retaliation then is even more inconvenient to trigger. It provides a melee damage bonus based on your current shields. The maximum value is larger than all Acolyte Arcanes, clocking in at 420%. It's additive to Pressure Point, so you'll probably want to remove that mod. The problem with it being scaled on current shields is that shields are designed to take damage. If you've got a frame that has lots of shields, they usually intend to use those in a fight. If you've got a frame that can keep their shields up, they usually don't actually have a lot of shields, nor reason to invest into them. With it taking 2,800 shields to get the full value out of Retaliation, very few frames can reach that even with primed redirection. In fact, most frames with primed redirection equipped wouldn't even reach primed pressure points damage bonus at full shields. Retaliation wants you to build heavily into shields, but then also demands you don't use them. That's very inconvenient. Lastly are two more non-offensive arcanes. Melee Vortex triggers when you kill an enemy with a magnetic proc on them, even if the proc came with the killing blow. This is a pretty easy trigger to hit. Result, you pull in nearby enemies to that spot. It's a pretty strong pull effect, so does what it says on the tin, but it comes with a few downsides. Most curiously, it has no line of sight check. Usually, line of sight is an unwelcome limitation, preventing damage and effects spreading to unseen enemies. The lack of such limit is a problem for Vortex. Enemies which can be seen by neither you nor whatever you just killed will still be pulled in a straight line to that spot. This means they will impact on terrain, door frames, just about anything that could block them and hold them there briefly. With each trigger of the effect, this happens again and again. In tighter and more winding tile sets, like the Holvania Underground, I measured a decrease in kill rate because of this effect. Enemies were spending more time trying to get to me as they kept getting pinned down outside of my kill box. Genuinely, just taking off the arcane on an otherwise unchanged setup actually cleared missions faster. This isn't always the case. A build a regular viewer sent me, using Dual-Like or Arcane, Melee Vortex, Zarta's Whisper, and Invisibility for stealth damage, led to an absurdly effective kill rate in survival missions. Well, specific survival missions with good tiles and suitable factions. A magnetized enemy when killed would both spawn a damaging field and pull in other enemies. Those enemies would be poisoned and magnetized until dead, repeating the process. This cascades to the point the enemies basically spawn kill themselves. It's a peculiar niche setup bordering on abusive. Most of the time, however, Vortex cannot be such a huge boon to output. Then finally, there's Melee Fortification. It's got the most basic trigger of just killing an enemy. You're rewarded with 210 armor per kill. It doesn't say so on the Arcane, but this stacks virtually forever. You can have 10 kills for 2,100 armor, or 30 kills for 6,300 armor. The number has no real limit, but each stack is independent. After 10 seconds, it vanishes, no matter how many more kills you get. 10 seconds after your super burst of 30 kills, you're back to nothing. Many missions don't allow for a consistent kill rate, but rather have constant ups and downs. If you can survive that without the Arcane, you probably didn't need the Arcane. If you do need it, well, I guess you die. As it's a defensive Arcane, it gets less attention by default anyway. When talking about melee weapons, largely myself and others are focused on what the weapon can achieve, assuming you're already capable of staying alive. So this is the issue I run into when looking at melee arcanes on each new weapon and setup. Unless the weapon has some perfect niche, like Afflictions on Harmony, or Vortex on Dual-Like or Arcane, most of the arcanes either have awkward barriers to trigger them, or low impact results. It's not that melee influence is overpowered, instead it's one of the only arcanes made to work with the objectives we face regularly. But it doesn't have to be like that. I didn't ramble this far without a plan on how they could improve. Starting with the small exchanges. Melee influence needs none, and likewise melee Careen. They're both great at what they do. Melee exposure is also in a good spot. My only wish would be to swap it from losing all stacks on expiring to losing just one stack. This would make downtime moments or times you hit a solid flow without casting a little less punishing. A small detail for sure. Melee duplicate, just double hit. Always. It's a legendary tier arcane placed above influence and the others in terms of rarity and acquisition, where the most it can do is hit twice. locking it to only yellow crits is a weird condition for such a high tier item. I'm not concerned about it being too much of a staple neither. We have staple tools for most of our arsenals, from galvanized multi-shot mods to evergreen strength mods, to the dominance of some helmet options like Raw, Nourish and Raffle Advance. It's healthy for a very simple, legendary arcane to be an easy slot in. Let it hit twice. For melee afflictions, without undermining its current design and use cases, I think it'd be best with a bug fix intentionally revoked. Make it so that enemies which could be knocked down or lifted, if it weren't for a temporary effects like Overguard or Limbo Stasis, still get affected by afflictions even when the control effect is blocked. This would make it work on more non-boss enemies, reducing the number of effects that unintentionally shut it down, like the freezing effect of Arcane and Careen. It'd be more consistent and usable, but not more powerful with its already wonky damage math. With the remaining arcanes, the changes that would make them workable are a little more involved. Melee Animosity as it stands is doing not a lot, almost power crept by the update that introduced it. 3 changes in one would overhaul that while keeping its identity. 1. Make the trigger truthful by stacking per hit, not per attack. Hitting 5 enemies at once would give 5 stacks of the arcane. 2. Make the critical bonus a flat value after mods, with an appropriately rebalanced value of course. This would make it especially valuable to low crit weapons that otherwise aren't supported in this way, and would be a niche competitor to Raffle Advance. 3. Add a secondary effect that heavy attack kills increase the range of the melee for a short time, stacking up to 3 meters. This circles the effect back around, making light attacks buff heavy attacks, and heavy attacks buff light attacks, especially useful for landing even more multi-hits. Animosity would remain the arcane for light attacks, adding crits to heavy attacks. It'd be more reliable, faster to stack, and opens up otherwise less viable options in the arsenal. As for melee Doughty, it's similar to Afflictions in that it's not great the majority of the time, but has a few super niche use cases that I wouldn't want taken away from anyone. However, the name really stands out to me. Doughty, as in brave and valiant. Nothing about critical damage from puncture seems very valiant to me. So, as a secondary effect of the arcane, I'd have it grant additional movement and particle velocity based on the same puncture chance trigger. The Doughty warrior leading the charge is far more in line with the name and carries utility in being a mobility option even when not actively fighting. On the topic of arcane names, melee Retaliation. To retaliate is to respond in kind, usually to face hostility with an attack. As it stands, melee Retaliation currently encourages you to avoid attacks to maintain your precious shields, actively refusing to use the hit points you've invested in. That's backwards. My change would be 2 parts. First, the damage bonus is based on maximum shields rather than current shields. That would allow you to invest into those hit points on shield tanking frames without worrying that your damage bonus will evaporate. Second, to make the retaliation bit real, the damage bonus is doubled while your shield gate is active. You get a mini rage mode, lashing out furiously at those that would dare shatter your defenses. You are encouraged to walk that line close to the brink for the greatest impact. You'd still need a decent shield pool to make use of the effect. If you had a small shield max for easier shield gating, you'd only be doubling a small bonus. Next then, with melee Vortex, the greatest downside is that it's almost doing too much by not having a line of sight check. Giving it that limitation to avoid wasteful halting of enemy movement would already be a boon to it. But to give it a little more pizzazz, and make grouping up enemies more valuable even to disadvantaged weapons, 1 secondary effect. For a few seconds after grouping enemies, your melee gets no penalty from follow through. As it stands, a 0.5 follow through weapon hitting a group of unlimited enemies would only do twice as much damage as if it just hit a single enemy. Various weapons have better follow through and are natively more suited to the job. Still, the arcane groups enemies without incapacitating them would be more welcome if it then enabled the rapid dispatching of that group. For our penultimate arcane, melee Fortification, my biggest gripe is that it runs out far too easily to rely on. Now the first part of changing that, moving from an independent stack to decaying 1 stack at a time, would be overpowered in itself. If all you needed was 1 kill every 10 seconds, you'd hit the hidden limit of 255 stacks just a couple minutes into a survival mission. Over 53,000 armor would be a little busted. So the second change will be to introduce a new stacking penalty. Each current stack of fortification would reduce the trigger chance by 30% multiplicatively. Unstacked, you're guaranteed to get 210 armor on the first kill. With one stack, it'll be 70%, then 49%, then 34%, and so on. Each higher stack becomes more and more difficult to get until you reach a point where the top stack will decay before you manage to get the next triggering kill. I've not chosen 30% randomly. I'm TheKengineer. Of course I simulated this with various kill rates and stacking penalties. 30% in a short 5-minute mission with 50 kills per minute would average around 10 stacks, with a peak of around 11 to 14. That's an average of 2,100 armor already. With 100 kills per minute in a 20-minute mission, a survival mission for example, the average stacks will be around 15, with a peak of around 20 stacks. In its current state, Fortification in a 50 kill per minute mission would average about 8 stacks, or 17 in a 100 kill per minute mission, so this retains about the same average power. However, it does away with the ever-present risk of losing all defense 10 seconds after a burst of kills. The stacking penalty then also keeps the experience of pushing harder for that peak kill rate, leading into a peak of armor stacks, rewarded by sticking around for more than just 10 seconds flat. Same identity, but far more reliable as a defensive tool. Lastly then is melee Crescendo. Requiring finishes for initial combo, when finishers don't even benefit from initial combo, it's certainly a choice. Only Ashe really shines with this, and almost every other use of Crescendo is to build combo for not melee. As it stands, there's not really any arcane that highlights finisher builds, so Crescendo is the perfect spot for that. Adding a baseline plus 100% finish damage, plus an extra 25% per combo multiplier. This would cap at plus 375% on most weapons, a hefty and impactful bonus to a largely underutilized attack style. I wouldn't be worried about this overpowering Ashe builds, because they already one-shot the entire Vanguard Imperator. He wouldn't notice the difference. Every build that's passed up Crescendo can feel the buff. My grand takeaway for you from this is that melee arcanes, and buffs in general, don't need to keep being more kills per minute outright. If everything is competing to be the best killer, we're just going to pick the couple options that are the best killer. Instead, leaning into making different approaches work is where variety shines. The range on Animosity, the freeze on Careen, the finishes on Crescendo, the speed on Doughty, the R on Fortification, the rage on Retaliation, the grouping follow through on Vortex. Choice is best served when things are truly different, served without undue barriers to access. In future, new melee arcanes could fill yet more unjudged spaces, from enhanced loot, to team buffs, to healing, to casting support. New uncommon tier arcanes could be mission specific, designed specifically for Spy, Void Flood, Alchemy and the like, taking a page out of Folly's sketchbook. If it's always just kills per minute, the hammer will continue to see only nails. What do you think about these changes? Do you feel that there's room for more than just nerfing the meta as some others often call for? If so, pop a like on this video and make sure to subscribe to support the channel completely for free too. And as always, grab arcanes, shape your plays, and fight well, Tenno.